So, I mean, it was an iconic headline. It was a headline that I know at the time he certainly embraced and maybe came to haunt him towards the end of his life. But where on earth did it come from, Kelvin?
Well, what happened was, and this is the way that tabloids worked in the great old days when the Sun used to sell 4 or 4.5 million a day, was that it actually came, I was in a bar in Fleet Street when the mistress of the managing director of the Sun and News of the World said this is what had happened to a model friend of hers. And being a tabloid gutter snipe, I rushed back to the office, and it was a very quiet day. And so we led on that, you know, the Berlin Walls and various other wars and various things seemed less interesting than Freddie Starr eating somebody's hamster.
I mean, you were the editor, but of course you had a boss above you. When you tried to tell him that was going to be the front page, what was the reaction? Well,
you know, those were in the days when Rupert was really all over everything. And when I used to tell him basically that we were leading on stories about NATO or some obscure country having a revolution to keep him quiet, because immediately he heard a story like that, he'd say, "Haven't you got any real news out there, Kelvin?" and I used to agree that it was a thin day, but telling Rupert what was probably not a good idea, to be honest.
You must have, Kelvin, over the years come up with some great headlines as well as this one, but the fact that this endured and lasted for such a long time, do you think that was a little bit because as it came out, I mean, it's the extraordinary nature of the story, the headline, he'd gone to his girlfriend's house, he'd asked her to make him a sandwich, she said no, so apparently he got a hamster and put it between 2 bits of bread. Didn't actually ever eat the sandwich, but that's the hamster. But do you think it was a little bit because Freddie embraced it at the time and he sort of quite enjoyed the headline and the publicity that came from it that means it's endured this long?
I don't think anybody today would really understand how massively popular and how enormously funny Freddie Starr was. The truth about the matter was when he went out on stage, if he was in a manic mood, it was like electricity. The whole place was on edge, and he'd crack any kind of gag, and the whole place would absolutely fall about. He was a great, very funny star. Watching him slide downhill over the last 3 decades was very, very sad. And I think anybody who has hung around him knows that to be true.
And why was that, do you think? Was it because his comedy, some of his comedy, just doesn't work in 2019? Was it because of personal demons? Because he seems to have ended his time alone and rather sad.
Yes, I think that was inevitable. I do agree with your other point that comedy has changed and that his kind of gags would not be as acceptable as they were. But he had changed as well. But he was always right on the edge, which made him, A, very funny, but you were kind of worried at the same time. You kind of got the shakes even while you were watching him.
Yeah, he kept everybody on edge, didn't he? Some of those clips, certainly from the 80s and 90s, are just extraordinary. You talk about change there, Kelvin. You were at the heart of the Sun when, as you were saying, it was selling 4.5 million copies a day. The media landscape's changing dramatically now, and the way we enjoy comedy, the way we enjoy media, the way we enjoy communication has changed. The advent of social media has certainly had an impact on that. There's another story we'd like to ask you about, of course, which is that Danny Baker tweeted a picture regarding the royal birth that has been considered racist, and he has since lost his job from the BBC. You yourself lost your job as a columnist at The Sun for writing a column. You didn't realise that the heritage of the footballer that you were writing about had black heritage, and you made some conclusions about his performance and the way he moved that equally were seen that you had to lose your job. What's your thoughts on the Danny Baker situation?
Well, I agree with Dara O'Brien that in the Danny Baker case, apologising and deleting the tweet, that should have been enough. I think Danny Baker was absolutely balmy to have done it. I can't imagine under what circumstances he thought that was a good idea. But I think a quick suspension and then back again, and if he says he's genuinely sorry, then why shouldn't he keep his job? But that's the price of public life today.
So could you see someone else picking him up? I mean, he is a world-class broadcaster. He's worked in the industry for many, many years. Can you see that, as you say, he'll do a bit of time out, but then someone will come along and scoop him up, or do you think that should be it?
Well, I own a radio station, and I don't think I think he's unhireable right now. Time is a healer. I hope he comes back into it in 3 to 6 months. I quite liked him pouring a bucket over the faceless BBC Herberts who fired him. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's very much your style as well, of course, Kelvin. Thank you very much for joining us this morning to share your stories and your thoughts on Freddie Starr. And certainly, because I think I'm right in saying that headline was voted the most memorable headline of the century or the decade or the 20 years? Ever, I'm being told.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised. The genius wrote it.
We'll let you have the last word.
You can see why he is who he is.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's a touch of the Piers Morgans there. Where's Piers lying in his pit with his trotters up this morning?
Absolutely.
That's exactly where he is.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Don't you worry about that, Kelvin. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.